Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book show comparison for The Expanse Season 4, Episode 9, Saculum. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare The Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well these adaptations work. So let's start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to Season 4, Episode 9. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't read the novels, not to worry, I will not spoil any future events that occur beyond Season 4, so you are safe from future spoilers. So our episode begins with a montage of scenes that shows some of the events of the season from Miller's perspective and how he's been fighting with the proto-molecule creators for control over the Miller construct, and it depicts a conflict, one in which Miller loses until we get caught up to current events that shows Miller screaming that is meant to signify Miller is regaining control. When Holden recovers, he asks Miller where the hell he's been, to which Miller replies that he's been there the whole time. Holden then inquires about his hat, and Miller responds to that saying that it's not his hat, that belongs to the investigator, and he refers to fighting his cage masters over control. He then suggests there's a blank spot where his new bosses can't go, that every time he reaches out to it, part of him dies. He then suggests to Holden that they go there to kill this place's ghosts. So in the novels, Miller never goes away. He's with Holden the whole time, and he suggests going to the dead spot earlier on, but Holden was too busy dealing with the blindness and the death slugs. So once he got that sorted, he agreed to go with Miller. Also, there was never implied a difference between Miller and the investigator, nor was there a conflict between Miller and his proto-molecule masters. The show seems to imply a much more intelligent and active proto-molecule presence, whereas in the novels it's more implied as a reactionary remnant that is just executing a pre-planned program rather than actively thinking. A Miller and an investigator is one and the same, where because it's a recreation of Miller, it's a thinking person and is able to be more active and think more, and thus develop differently from the rest of the proto-molecule technology. Also in the show, Miller says the proto-molecule doesn't want them to go to the dead spot, whereas in the books it does, as the whole point of the investigator is to investigate what happened to the proto-molecule creators, and the dead spot is their biggest clue. And frankly, the way the Miller / the investigator was portrayed previously in the show, particularly in Season 3, is more consistent to how he was described in the novels. And suddenly saying that whenever Miller is wearing a hat, it's the investigator, and when it's not wearing a hat, it's Miller, is completely inconsistent with what the show has established. Now, it's been suggested to me that since the show is a visual medium, it couldn't portray Miller as a mix of the proto-molecule and Miller, so it had to portray it as a struggle between two different versions, but I completely reject that suggestion, as there are definitely ways, even in the visual medium, to portray the internal struggle or the amalgamation that would have worked rather than an outright fight over control over the Miller construct, which is completely inconsistent with everything that's been established, so I'm going to give this a -5. So next we see Elvie in the hallway talking to Fayaz over the comms, and he talks about how he wished he was down there with her. But she retorts by mentioning the parasites that cause blindness and the slugs that can kill you, but he retorts by noting that all he has to look forward to is a fiery death when his ship crashes. But he says he wishes that he was down there with her, and it's obvious there are some romantic connotations involved, but he tries to walk it back by saying that he wishes he was with a friend, but she smiles and says she agrees, so she actually seems accepting of these romantic overtones. So, as I'm sure I mentioned dozens of times before during the course of this series, in the novels, Faiz was down on the planet with her, and by this stage the two of them did hook up and start a romantic relationship, so this was a nice shout out to the novels, while also staying true to the dynamic they established in the show. I don't think their relationship works as well as it did in the novels, but that's mainly because of the decision to leave Faiz on the ship instead of bringing him down to the planet, which I can't fault the show for. Plus, I appreciate this shout out, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then, Elvie hears Holden talking in a nearby corridor, so she hangs up with Faiz in order to eavesdrop. Holden is talking to Miller about the blind spot. Miller says that it may be a remnant left behind from an old war, the protomolecule creators fought and lost, and Holden deduces it could be an unexploded bomb. Holden agrees that they owe him, but asks if he can get his people safe before helping him. But Miller explains that this could be doing two things at once, as if the bomb gets rid of all the protomolecule technology, that would get rid of whatever is holding his ships and thus save his people. Holden asks how he knows doing so won't just kill everyone, and Miller answers that he doesn't, but the only alternative is to just wait for everyone to starve to death. So in the novels, Miller had this conversation with Holden a while ago, as he never disappeared. Plus, Miller didn't phrase it in the terms of helping him get rid of the protomolecule, more in the terms of finding out what happened to its creators. However, when the ships get stuck in orbit, Miller does suggest that it could turn off the security system that's holding them there. So it is put in terms more of turning off a security system rather than killing the protomolecule. And because in the novels Miller and the investigator are one and the same, Holden has more of an adversarial attitude when dealing with Miller, as he resents him for being in his head, which I'm fine with. So ultimately, I like the book's version of these events better, so I'm going to give this a -2. So next we see Jacob with the Belter kid whose parents were killed, where he tells him it's okay, that he can sleep, that he'll be there when he wakes up, which indicates that he's going to be taking care of him now. So now's the time that I have to admit to a mistake that I made in the previous video, as in the novels, Bajia and Lucia had two kids, Felsia and Jasik. And I had assumed it was the same case in the show, but Jasik was younger. But it turns out that I was wrong. In the show, Lucia and Jacob only have one kid, Felsia. Jacob and Lucia will later adopt this abandoned Belter kid, whom I originally had mistaken for Jasik, because I was expecting them to have a younger boy, and I didn't notice that this child was the same one whom Holden saved and Amos was looking after. So I'm giving myself a -5 for making that mistake. But the show, I'm going to give a +2, as that's a great way to make this child relevant and lead to the happy family with Jacob and Lucia. We then see Amos and Wei in a corridor talking, where Wei tries to persuade Amos to come stay at the RC camp, and Amos just asks her if her boss knows she's asking him to sleep over. Wei just asks him what is it with the two of them, if he's jealous because he thinks that she slept with him. Amos says that he didn't ask and he doesn't care. It's just that he knew people like Murtry and he's no good to be around. Wade counters that he's good people and that he and Amos are a lot alike, which is the real reason why he doesn't like him. Amos looks at her with a really serious look and says that he would never lie to her, but she's unimpressed and walks off. Now, as I surely mentioned before, the novels never got in as much detail about Amos and Wade's relationship, only that they liked each other and spent a lot of time together. So it seems their relationship didn't go this deep, and they never really had a conversation like this. So I think it adds a lot to the story to see that it does, which they had been building to all season, in which case the conversation makes a lot of sense. Also, it's a great build-up to what's coming, to make that so much more powerful, so I'm going to give this a +3. Next, we see Holden talking to Miller. When Holden leans against the wall from exhaustion, Miller asks Holden if he's tired, and he says that he's Miller says that he's had to reinvent himself dozens of times from fighting off the protomolecule. Holden says that he hasn't gotten any sleep in 3 days. Miller says that he's got to just keep putting one foot in front of the other until they win or die trying. Miller leads him to a hole and tells him to jump in. Holden is resistant, but Miller insists that it's safe and says that it's the quickest way to get to where they need to go. But as Holden's inspecting the hole, Miller disappears because Elvie appears. She said that she heard him talking to someone and assumed it was Miller. Holden explains that he's going to go in the hole to try to turn off whatever it is that is holding their ships in orbit. Elvie insists that she's going to go with him. When Holden says no, she tries to insist that her people are at risk just as much as his, but he says that she can't go because Miller only appears when no one else is around and that he needs Miller to guide him. That seems to appease her as she backs off and he jumps into the hole. So in the novels, Holden hadn't slept for 4 days, I believe, and as soon as they cured the blindness, Elvie insisted that he get some sleep, but Miller woke him up, insisting that they go north to the blind spot. So Holden got up, which Elvie didn't appreciate and insist that he go back to sleep, but Holden insisted that he needed to go with Miller to turn off whatever it is that was keeping them there. Now in the novels, Elvie didn't know about Miller, and when Holden tried to explain it to her, she just assumed that he was delirious with sleep deprivation and didn't take him seriously. So Holden went with Miller, except he didn't jump down a hole. Instead, Miller took him to an underground alien subway train station of sorts, and he got on the train, for lack of a better term. Now, it seems obvious to me the real reason why they just had him jump in the hole instead of showing this alien subway system was budget. It's probably would have been way too expensive to show, but I feel they could have cut back on some of like the Martian or Belter scenes and focused more money here, where I think it would have been worth it, as I don't think having a hole that magically takes him there cuts it. However, an underground alien subway not only makes more sense, but is much cooler, so I'm going to give this a -3. Next, we see Mercury talking to Way, where he tells her that they're getting ready to move on the Barbacola in orbit, so they need to prepare to move on the Belters here. He asks her where Holden and Amos are, as he considers them both threats, and while she tells him where Amos is, she doesn't know where Holden is. And his men report in, and nobody knows where Holden is. He then sees Elvie and talks to her, noting that she and Holden seem quite friendly with one another, and asks her if she knows where he is. She says that she doesn't, but he can tell that she's lying, so he advances on her in a threatening manner, making it clear that she needs to tell him where Holden is right now. And while the scene cuts here, it's heavily implied that she does tell him where he went. So in the novels, there was no plan to move on the Belters and no correlation between the attack on the Barbacola and moving against the Belters on the surface. Rather, Mercury saw from Holden's signal on his hand terminal that he was moving north at 200 kilometers per hour when both carts were accounted for. So he approaches Elvie about where Holden went, and she mentions what he said about Miller and trying to turn the alien technology off, but she insists that he's just delusional and sleep deprived. And she tries to argue with Mercury when he takes her seriously, saying that Holden's just crazy. But then he shows her Holden's signal and it's going 200 kph, and she starts to change her mind. I think both ways work fine for the respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. Then we go back to the Edward Israel, where Fayez detects the shuttle preparing to launch, so asks the security officer in charge about it. He insists it's classified and tells him to sit down, but Fayez insists to know where it's going, as there's no reason to launch the shuttle. And then the security officer gets threatening, reaches for his gun, and insists once again that it's none of his business, and tells him to sit the fuck down. So Fayez does so, but knows that something's up. So I do like this scene for the show's story, I do. But when compared to the novels, it's not nearly as good. In the novels, there was a whole complex situation with Havelock, who was the security chief in charge, who defected to the Rocinante by helping the Rocinante free Naomi, which left behind a chief engineer who was a bigot against Belters and gung-ho on getting revenge, who had orders from Mercury to stop the Barbara Bacola from leaving orbit, and a militia of engineers that Havelock himself trained. Also, there was the civilian captain of the Edward Israel, Captain Marwick, who had no authority over the RCE security, and it added a lot more complexity than one random security guy we never saw before and will never see again. And while I understand the show's decision to cut out the Havelock storyline, and in fact I've praised it before, there are some drawbacks to this, and this is one of them. So I'm going to give this a -2. Next, we see Amos go to Elvie to ask if she's seen Holden, and an RCE security officer who's guarding her tells Amos no one's allowed to talk to her. Amos responds by grabbing his gun and tossing it aside. When he goes for the gun, Amos tells him, "I wouldn't," and then he backs off. When the guard sticks around, Amos asks him if there's something they still need to discuss, so the guard leaves. Elvie tells Amos that Holden went with Miller to try to turn off the protomolecule technology, and Mercury and Wade went after him to stop him. Holden calls Alex on the Rocinante. Amos calls Alex on the Rocinante to ask if he knows where Holden's whereabouts are, but he does not, so Amos then calls Way, but she doesn't answer, so he leaves her a message that he's coming after her boss and not to get in his way. He then asks Elvie to show him exactly where Holden went. So in the novels, Holden goes to Amos and tells him that he's going north with Miller and asks him to stay behind to look after everyone to make sure that Mercury doesn't hurt anyone. However, Elvie goes to him after Mercury confronted her to tell him that Mercury went after Holden. So Amos reasons that if his job is to make sure Mercury doesn't hurt anyone, he better follow Mercury to make sure that he doesn't hurt anyone wherever he goes. So he prepares to drive north in a cart to the spot where Holden's signal is coming from. I will say that having Elvie under guard and the badass way in which Amos easily disarms the guard, as well as his threatening message to Way, is much more exciting and raises the tension level, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go to Holden, who is floating around while he's flying through the air. He wakes up and shortly thereafter finds himself arriving at his destination in a protomolecule-like alien structure. He hovers into where he stands upright. He touches the space that he just came from to see a purple haze similar to the one that they created in the slow zone in the ring station. Miller tells him to play with the toys later, that they need to keep going. Holden asks what this place is. Miller starts explaining that it was abandoned by the protomolecule creators a long time ago, when suddenly Miller has a hat on again and is talking about how shit keeps following him around, indicating that the investigator is trying to take over, but Miller reappears telling him to stay out of his head. He then tells Holden that his former masters are cracking the whip, looking for a way back in. Holden asks if there's anything he can do. Miller simply says, "Why don't we try killing them off for good?" So in the novels, it wasn't a floaty hole pushing Holden along with the purple haze. As I already mentioned, it was an underground train system that Holden did lose consciousness when he was writing, and he woke up when they were almost there. However, already at this stage, I believe, Miller had already put himself into one of those robotic insectoid type thingies that was actually described as quite large in the books as he was riding the train with Holden. They arrived at an alien structure, and the Miller bot, as Holden called it, helped guide him to find the blind spot. There was no talk of the protomolecules trying to take him over again, or Miller wanting to kill them off to stop that from happening. Again, in the novels, the protomolecule presence is more of a remnant, automated response, and the Miller/investigator was more of a more conscious version who in part did want to investigate like it was programmed to, but also was more concerned about turning off all the proto-molecule technology there. So I don't think having floaty purple haze is any substitution for a train system, and I think the whole Miller versus the Investigator fight is completely unnecessary. It seems to me they just added in there to create more suspense or make more of a clicking clock scenario that the protomolecule is on to Miller and they're running out of time, which I think is totally unnecessary because there's already enough of a ticking clock scenario with the ships falling out of orbit and Mercury coming after Holden. Plus, it makes no sense for Miller to say, "Get out of my head," when he's just something that's in Holden's head. So I'm going to give this a -4. Elvie then leads Amos back to the hole that Holden jumped into, and Amos gets his stuff ready to jump in himself. Elvie deduces that Amos is going to follow him and tells him that she's coming with him and tells him not to try to stop her. Amos says that she doesn't need his permission, but says that it might be a one-way trip. Elvie tells him that they're already on one. So in the novels, Elvie goes to Amos and tells him that Mercury is going after Holden on the cart, which is what makes Amos want to take the other cart to go after Mercury. However, when Elvie asks Amos to go with him, he says no. So Elvie has to convince him that he might need her scientific expertise, so eventually he agrees to let her go. So, right when they're getting ready to leave, she asks Faiz to jump in the cart with them, which Amos is not okay with, but she insists that she may not come back alive, so she wants to spend her final time with Faiz and they kiss, so Amos stops arguing with her. So it does make a degree of sense that Amos in the show wouldn't say no because he has no control over whether or not Elvie jumps in a hole, whereas in the novels he was driving a cart, so he does have say on who he lets in his car. So I'm going to give this a +1. So in orbit, the towing of the Barbacola is going well until Alex gets a text message from Faiz on the Edward Israel, who warns that a shuttle is heading right towards them, and then that a goon almost pulled a gun on him for just asking about it. Alex thanks him for the heads up and then tries to hail the shuttle. When it doesn't respond, he calls the Edward Israel about the shuttle heading towards them, and they just tell him to stand by. Alex warns that he needs an answer now, and when they don't reply, he calls Naomi and tells them to brace themselves as they're under attack. He then fires at the shuttle with the Rossi's PDCs, and it destroys the shuttle, but the debris hits the cargo bay, and an oxygen container is ruptured, which flies around and hits Lucia, knocking her out into space as Lucia spins around, fast flying away from the ship. Naomi attaches a cable to herself and tells Lucia to remain calm as she comes for her. She goes out into space and reaches for Lucia and manages to grab her and pull her back to the Rocinante. So this scene is an amalgamation of several scenes from the novels. First of all, Alex never gets a call from the Edward Israel warning about the shuttle. He doesn't need to, as it's rather obvious. And then the novels explain more that by shooting the shuttle with the PDCs, they just turn one large missile into a bunch of smaller missiles, as typically the Rocinante would dodge any incoming debris field caused by the PDCs, but because they were tethered to the Barbacola, they were unable to do so. And the debris field hit several key systems and caused the Rocinante to spin, and Havelock was hit in the shoulder by one of the debris and was injured. At first I thought this setback would make it so they couldn't save the Barbacola and it was doomed to collide with the planet, but Baziak came up with a plan to use the cannon to slowly push the Rocinante in the right direction. However, when they tried to execute this plan, the militia on the Edward Israel, led by the chief engineer, went into space with spacesuits and makeshift cannons and tried to fire at the Rocinante. Havelock went out there with a sniper rifle to stop them, but he was really reluctant to shoot them and tried to talk them down, but they refused to listen to him. They fired one of their makeshift cannons at Havelock, which threw him out into space and damaged his leg. Bozia went out into space to rescue him. Thus, the Naomi rescuing Lucia scene was kind of a stand-in for this scene. Once Havelock was safe, Bozia went over to the Barbara Bacola in a spacesuit to ensure the cables were secure at that end, while the militia shot at him. Even then, Havelock was hesitant to shoot at his own men until Naomi told him that if he let Bozia die, she wasn't going to let him back on the ship. So Havelock shot a couple of them, killing one of them, meaning Naomi was telling Bozia that the damage these missiles did to the Rosinante made the rescue plan for the Barbara Bacola impossible. So he needed to return to the ship, but he refused to do so. So I'm hesitant to give a score either way because I did enjoy the book's versions more as it was more involved, but I also understand that the show is really simplifying things by cutting out the Havelock storyline, which they had to cut a lot of things to go with this as well. So with that in mind, I thought this was a beautiful way to simplify things while keeping the most essential and exciting aspects of the storyline. Plus the scene of Naomi going to rescue Lucia was beautifully shot and a great conclusion to their character stories. So I'm going to give this a +2. We then see Mercury and Wei arrive at the alien structure and draw their guns as soon as they get there. Mercury tries to call the ship but can't get a connection, but Wei then gets the message that Amos sent her. Mercury says it's not a good idea to go into a military situation with an armed killer at their backs, so Amos needs to be taken care of first. Wei nods but says that if it has to be done, she's going to be the one to do it, and Mercury nods and says that she has his word. So in the novels, Mercury and Wei don't take the magic hole, as of course that doesn't exist in the novels, but they don't take the train system either, as only Miller had access to that, so they drive there in a car. Something that could have been done in the show, that couldn't have been done in the show, because in the show the continent was still flooded with the tsunami, but the tsunami never occurred in the novels, so they were still able to drive there. Amos never called and warned Wei in the novels, which in retrospect made Book Amos a bit smarter, but Mercury still deduced that Amos would come for them, so he left Wei outside the entrance to the alien structure to guard it. They never had the chat about Wei having to be the one to kill Amos, but it could have occurred off screen. But then again, Wei's connection to Amos was much stronger in the show than it was in the novels, which gave the scene more emotional weight, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then see Holden and Miller walking through the alien structure, where Miller explains finding this bomb is going to be the hard part. Holden says that he thought he knew where the bomb was, but Miller says he only knows where the bodies are buried. They then go through the door where they find a bridge leading over a vast open space. Holden asks him if he falls, how long will he be falling for? Miller vaguely answers, the rest of your life, and then disappears and then reappears on the bridge, so Holden jumps to follow. Now, this is more or less the same thing that happened in the novels, as Miller didn't know exactly where the bomb or the bullet, as they referred to it in the novels, was, but he had an idea. He described it more as a blank spot where he could not go. The structure was also described as vast, but I always thought of it more as an intricate, more large, more intricate than as what was depicted here, with like multiple levels, almost like a huge alien factory. However, the bridge was also in the novels and also said to be a long fall, so this all works the same for me, so I'm going to give this a 0. We then go back into orbit where Lucia and Naomi enter the command center to hear Alex threatening the Edward Israel. He then reports that the attack knocked the Barb off course and is going to collide with the planet. Lucia then suggests that they just scrap the Barb and save the people, saying that their dream is not worth any more people dying for. But then Alex comes up with a solution to save both, to use the Rosnate's railgun to correct for the decay and get the Barb back on track. Naomi is dubious about the plan, saying that it will put a tremendous strain on the tether, but Alex thinks it can work. Now, as I already mentioned, in the novels, it was Bozia that came up with this plan, so he never suggested that they just scrap the ship to save the people. Although I do have to say I really like that Lucia was willing to give up on the lithium from the Barb in order to save the people, where before she felt holding on to it, and the colony was more important than anything. It shows great character growth that wasn't there in the novels, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go back to Miller and Holden, where we see from Miller's perspective as he tells Holden he's not sure where this bomb is, but it's somewhere in this room. Holden says that he sees it, so Miller asks where, and Holden points right next to him and it says right here. We then cut to Holden's perspective, where we see a giant fiery black dot floating in the middle of the room. That seems more obvious than anything, but for some reason Miller can't see it. Miller asks Holden what it looks like, and Holden answers that it looks like the eye of an angry god. So Miller says that he needs to put himself into something physical. He sees a little robot-like thingy and says that that will do. He tells Holden that once he's in the robot, to move him as close to the eye of God thingy as he can, and then he'll turn everything on to full to make sure it's all destroyed. Holden asks why he has to wait till the last second to do it, and Miller answers that they're going to try to stop him once they figure out what he's trying to do. Holden asks how he'll know when it's done, and Miller answers that he'll know. Holden then realizes that Miller is going to walk through that thing and thus kill himself, but Miller argues that it wasn't much of a life anyway, and as a parting gift, Holden tells Miller that rain just tastes like water. So in the novels, Holden actually never gets to see the bomb or bullet that they're searching for, because they're searching for it when Elvie catches up to them, and which I'll touch more on later, and Holden goes off to find Murtry, leaving Elvie behind to help Miller. She's the one who finds the bomb. When Miller asks if there's anything out of the usual, she doesn't understand, as it's a huge and obvious, and just says what, like that. And when Miller asks what it looks like, she says that it looks like the eye of an angry god. Miller replies that, yeah, that's probably it then. There's no goodbyes between Holden and Miller, which I kind of like. That there is goodbyes, it's a bit more touching, so I'm going to give this a +2. So we then see Amos and Elvie arrive at the alien structure, and Way is there waiting for them. As soon as Amos gets there, she starts talking to Amos, trying to convince him to stand down. Amos simply asks where Holden is, and Way says that Murtry's gone to deal with him. Amos says that he has to stop him, but Way insists that she can't let him do that. She then tells him to cut the tough guy act, that they both kill people for money, and it's impossible for people like them to keep their hands clean. She then insists that they can finally profit off of themselves instead of someone else, and that just one day of shitty choices and they'll be set for the rest of their lives. Amos asks her if Murtry sold her on that crap, but she says that it's the truth. Amos levels with her that he's going after Murtry, and if she gets in his way, he's going through her, and she simply says that she can't let him do that, and he responds by shooting her dead. However, she gets a couple of shots off, one that hits him, and then Murtry, who's hiding in a corner, pops up and shoots Amos several times. Amos collapses to the ground bloody, but starts shooting back at Murtry. Elvie runs to his aid, but he yells at her to go, so Elvie goes running towards Holden as the sound of gunfire can be heard in the background. So, something similar goes down in the novels, although it happens above ground near the cart, where once Amos arrives, Way is there waiting for him. But she doesn't try to convince him that he's a killer or to take the money and run, but she simply says that she has orders that no one's to enter RCE property. Amos tries to talk her out of it, but when she refuses to back down, Amos kills her. But Mercury was hiding and shoots him several times. In fact, Mercury gets the better of him and stands over his body ready to give the killing shot when Elvie and Fayez appear and argue with him. Fayez surprises him by jumping on top of him, but Mercury shoots Fayez as well. Fayez yells at Elvie to run, so she does, at which point Amos starts shooting at Mercury. So, similar, but the confrontation between Amos and Way was a lot more emotional and impactful in the show as they spent more time building their relationship, and Book Way didn't really plead with Amos the way that show Way did. In the show, they really played it like Way loved Amos and really wanted that life, but Amos couldn't live with himself if he let Holden down. However, that being said, in the show, when Amos shot Way, she was unprepared and, in fact, surprised, which portrayed Way as a bit incompetent because Amos just said that he was going through her and she didn't defend herself in any way, but also made Amos look more heartless as he shot her when she was unprepared, when she clearly loved and trusted him and thought that he wouldn't shoot her. So I do think that the show's version is better, but not by much, so I'm going to give this a +1. So Elvie runs and finds Holden, who asks what she's doing there, and she responds that Mercury has come to kill him. He sees blood on her clothes and asks if she's hurt, but she answers that she isn't, but says that Amos is shot. Holden asks if he's dead, and she answers that she doesn't know, but Way is dead. Amos killed her. Holden runs off to find Amos and tells her to stay there. She finally notices the Eye of the Angry God thingy and asks Holden what it is. Holden simply tells her not to touch it and runs off. While she's staring at it in fascination, she hears loud metallic sounds which turn into Miller's voice in its new robot form, asking who the hell she is. She says her name and asks what he is. Miller simply asks where Holden went, and she answers that he went to find Amos, and Miller says that his timing fucking sucks. She realizes who he is and says that he's Holden's ghost, Miller, and he says that what he is fucked. He asks her if she sees something unusual in the room, and she points to the bomb and says yes. Miller then drops to the floor in his new robot form and tells her that she's gonna have to help him. So in the novels, Elvie finding Holden wasn't so easy. The alien structure was more like a labyrinth, and she was worried that Mercury might find her first. But she got a connection to Holden's hand terminal and used it to track him down. Now, as I mentioned before, Holden and the Miller bot had yet to find the alien bomb at this stage, but when Elvie appeared, she told Holden that Amos was dead, but Holden didn't believe it because Amos was supposed to be the last one standing. Miller says that one issue is more of a priority than another. Holden says yes, it is, but that he doesn't think they agree on which one. Holden then says that he's going to stop Mercury and tells Elvie to stay behind and help Miller. So Holden properly introduces Miller to Elvie in the books. Both work fine, but I kind of like that Elvie gets introduced to Miller properly. Although he in the novels, she didn't really believe he existed until she saw him. Also, the Miller bot didn't look as cool as it was described in the novels. It was described as more insectoid and much, much bigger. So I'm going to give this a -1. So then we see Holden walking across the bridge when Mercury emerges on the other side, and the two of them square off. Holden asks Mercury if Amos is dead. Mercury answers that he doesn't know. Mercury then asks Holden if he's broken his planet yet, and Holden says that he's working on it. Mercury goes on a diatribe about how bloody history is when concerned with the frontier, that post office, railroads, and jails cost thousands of lives to build, that men like Mercury are those who tame the frontier, whereas men like Holden are the type that come later. He then tells Holden that he should have stayed at home until Mercury built a post office. Holden responds by saying that he knew another man who used past genocides to justify his actions, and Mercury asks if Holden was persuaded. Holden simply said that a friend of his shot him in the face. The two of them then draw their weapons and fire on each other. Holden is gazed, but Mercury takes a bigger hit to his shoulder, which causes him to collapse on the bridge and drop his weapon down the void. Holden stands over him, and Mercury goads him to finish the job, but Holden says that he's taking him back to stand trial, as that's how civilizations work. So this is pretty much the same as it went down in the novels, but the novels had a few extra details. For one, more attention was made on the fact that Mercury wanted to stop Holden from turning off the protomolecule technology because he considered it property of the RCE, even if that meant everyone on the planet died, including himself. His job was to deliver the alien technology to his corporation intact, as it was worth a large fortune, and he was willing to die and let everyone else there die in order to do it. Whereas the show made it seem like Mercury just wanted to kill Holden so they could kill the Belters off, and that he was expecting to personally become rich off of it. Which to me makes a bit less sense, because that would imply he expected to live, which if he stopped Holden from turning off the alien technology, why would he expect to live? It's hard to tell because the show doesn't really address this. Just has one line where Mercury asks Holden if he's broken his planet yet. Also in the books, their face-off takes place after Miller turned everything on, so there's said to be like blue firefly-like thingies flying everywhere, as is typical of the protomolecule. In fact, the book describes it a bit like tumbleweeds rolling in the wind, trying, in my opinion, a bit too hard to make this like a Western shootout, so I was glad the show cut that part out. Also, the way the two draw on each other here is they're both ready for it and know it's coming, whereas in the novels, Holden kind of sucker punches Mercury, as he drew on Mercury while he was mid-sentence and was caught off guard. Kind of the reverse with Amos and Way, as in the show, Amos drew on Way when she was caught off guard, but Holden and Mercury were both ready for it, and in the books it was the other way around. And I gotta be honest, I prefer the books version. It just fits with their characters more to me, that Amos would draw when the other was ready because he's a badass who's confident in himself and wants the challenge, whereas Holden, it's not about the challenge or proving himself, it's about stopping this madman at all costs, and if that means sucker punching him, then he'll do it. That combined with, I think the show loses a lot by not mentioning Mercury wanting to stop Holden from turning off the alien technology, meaning he's willing to die to give this technology to the RCE. So I'm going to give this a -4. Meanwhile, Elvie tries to guide the Miller bot to the bomb. She asks him if he's really Detective Miller from Ceres, sentient and independent. The Miller bot answers that if he's not, he's acing his Turing test. Elvie takes him into close to the bomb until he's about a meter away. And Miller says that that's close enough. He then proceeds to turn everything on. Everything gets bright blue and glowing inside this room and in the bridge where Holden is, and then back to the alien structure where all the refugees are. And then from orbit, the entire planet starts to look like a gray, glowing blue ball. Miller then walks towards the bomb, but is stopped and grabbed by a pillar that snatches him up and tries to destroy him. A swarm of the mechanical insects swarm Elvie, but fall dead when some of them enter the alien bomb. And then the Miller bot is dropped back onto the floor, but is severely damaged. Elvie tells him to go straight, but Miller says that he's fucked, so Elvie has to drag him to the bomb. Holden returns just in time to see Elvie dragging the Miller bot and fall directly into the alien bomb. So in the novel, they had the same line about Miller acing his Turing test and Elvie guiding him to the bomb, but when the protomolecule technology came to stop Miller, it was more in the form of several more giant insect-like robots that swarmed on Miller, and they had like a huge robot battle. One that Miller eventually won, but was severely damaged, so Elvie had to drag him to the Angry Eye. Also in the novel, the whole planet never turned into a glowing blue ball, which to me seemed a bit much. So I understand we didn't get the giant robot battle because of budget, but still, it would have been nice. So I'm going to give this a -3. So my final adaptation score for Sacrium is a -5. Look, I actually really liked this episode. In fact, it was my favorite episode of the season and probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. But when directly compared to the novels, it doesn't quite hold up as well. Some of this was due to budget reasons, as what was described in the novels was quite grandiose. I know hard to pull off on the budget of a show that's not extremely popular. But others had more to do with not explaining things as clearly, like Mercury wanting to preserve the protomolecule technology for his corporation even at the cost of everyone's lives, and adding in unnecessary plots about Miller and investigating having this fight between each other, which I think is completely unnecessary. But still, there are a lot of instances where the show improved upon the novels as well, so still a decent adaptation. So that's it for my book-to-show comparison for The Expanse Season 4, Episode 9. I will be back next week for my book-to-show comparison for the Season 4 finale. However, that video will be a book spoiler video, so you should not watch that video unless you have read Book 5. But be sure to check out my channel for more Expanse videos, as well as more videos on other shows like Better Call Saul, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.